It's like you got it on YouTube.
Got it? You see it on there?
I just see that little message. It says webinar is now streaming live on YouTube.
Oh, you see more than I see. Okay.
You don't see it on that top left?
I do not, but that's okay. We're
Yeah.
gonna go. Okay. I guess we're live somewhere. So go. Here we are. We are. Hello, Dr. Marty Polio. How are you?
Great, Sadiqa Reynolds. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. First of all, I need to start by thanking you for bearing with us during our technical difficulties, which were not the Urban League's technical difficulties, but rather some communication problem between Facebook and Zoom. But thank you for your patience and for your flexibility.
No problem at all. Happy to be here.
Well, we are happy to have you here. And I said it last night, I'll say it again. You have been really wonderful about always making time for the league and any issues that we raise with community, always giving us attention. And I really do appreciate you for that. So I want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. I want you to just start by telling us just a little bit about yourself. I think most of us feel like we know you so well, but I don't know that we know all of your background or relevant background, whatever you want to tell us. We know you're married, we know you got, but you can go through all of that.
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to. I mean, I just briefly in my original career, my first career, I thought I was going to be a basketball coach. That's what I wanted to be, was a college basketball coach. And that's what my dad was, and trained all my life to do that. That's how I got to Jefferson County, was to take the coaching job at Shawnee in 1997. Was just excited to have my own team and excited to have a bunch of kids who wanted to be coached. And so I had a great experience coaching at Shawnee and Wagner High School for several years. And then decided that coaching wasn't my pathway. And, you know, I had a passion for teaching. The teaching part of coaching I loved so much. And so at that point, I decided that I was a teacher for several more years, but decided I wanted to be an administrator. And like many, many leaders, get tapped on the shoulder by somebody. And I was fortunate enough to be tapped on the shoulder by a mentor who told me I would make a good principal. And so I was on that path for a long time, thought that's what I would do. I became the principal at Jeffersontown High School, was there for 8 years. And then Dr. Hargens, our former superintendent, asked me to take over at Doss High School. And so I did that for 2 years. So I was a JCPS principal for 10 years. So altogether, this is my 24th year in JCPS.
Wow.
Never really thought I would be a superintendent. I love being a principal, and that's what I thought I would be. But when the opportunity presented itself, I jumped into this crazy job. And I don't know who would do a job like this unless you truly love the district that you're in. And so, you know, I see superintendents that move around a lot from district to district, and I find it difficult to think about doing something for a district like this that you just don't love the district. And I have so many thousands of kids that I go around this city that I just run into. I know we were at a fundraiser earlier this year together, and we ran into a young man who was out of J-Town several years ago when I was the principal there. And that's what means so much to me, is to know so many kids that are in this community. And I'm getting old, so sometimes I don't even know which school they were at or what year. But it's really neat to be able to see so many kids in the community, and then so many teachers. You know, hundreds and hundreds of teachers and educators and JCPS employees. So I'm just proud to represent this district and this community, and do everything I can to improve this district to the best of my ability. I'm proud to be able to work with 7 great board members. And so that.
Now, you don't, now, Marty, don't please. I heard you. We heard you about the board members.
No,
okay.
You know, obviously,
don't get me started, Marty. Let's keep.
But you know, we you know, they care too.
I know.
And work very hard too. So my daughter's been in JCPS, and she was a kindergartner. And you know, so I have a wife, Jessica, that works for the Kentucky Derby Festival, and a daughter who's been in JCPS now she's a 9th grader, and she's at Youth Performing Arts School and has been in JCPS since kindergarten. So we're all true JCPS. My mom was a teacher in JCPS, and my dad taught in the old Louisville City School. So a whole family of educators.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I didn't necessarily realize you had all of that background in with JCPS. And you said something, it's a pleasure for me to witness people running into you when students see you, or even there was a teacher once that I saw seeing you for the first time in a long time. And it's always nice. And I think it says a lot about you that people feel the way you do, with the way that they do. And so I'm very glad that you're here and that you're the superintendent of Jefferson County Public Schools. And I know you've got a hard job. So hopefully the Urban League has conveyed our desire to help and support you, because we care very much about the mission, about the work, and about the young people that you are striving every day to educate. And
Thank
so, and my comment about the board is just simply, let's just be clear, the Urban League doesn't always agree with some of the comments that are made from certain board members, and they know that. I mean, we've been very, very clear about that. And so to the extent that we're focused on equity, I think that it is important for them all to really be educated and line up with you. I think I cannot imagine having a job where you're not in line with the board members and you're the expert, right? I mean, you have a couple of board members maybe who have come up through the ranks, but generally, I mean, it's like I say about my job. I am the person in the building who is certified to be the CEO of the Louisville Urban League. There are certainly other people who are talented and gifted and smart, and maybe could even do the job, but I am the one that's certified to do the job. And so it's important to have some alignment with your board. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think for the vast majority of time we have that. Now there's seven, so that's difficult at times from
Mhm.
varying backgrounds. But I think, what I find, Sadiqa, is that they are committed to the kids of JCPS. Um, and I'm really proud of the work that we do. And I think they've been very supportive of change, the
Yeah.
change that they want to see happen as well. And so, it's been a good relationship between us. We have a board chair who, as you know, came up through JCPS and has been an educator for decades in JCPS, and
Right.
truly cares about the citizens and constituents and students she represents. So, yeah, I'm proud to represent them.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you saying that. And it makes me feel better to know you feel that way. So I appreciate you really sharing that. And Diane Porter is the board member you were talking about. She happens to also be an Urban League board member.
That's right.
Let's talk about COVID-19 and commitment. So tell us about the challenges of transitioning into distance learning.
Sure. And I'll recap a little what I said last night, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
please. We deleted it. Go
Yeah, that's
right ahead.
okay. Good, good. So, when we first started monitoring this COVID-19 crisis, it was right at the end of February. And I had seen a story, and it was, I think, pretty prevalent in the state of Washington at that time. And I came in that one morning and brought my team together and said, I think we're going to have some issues with this COVID-19 thing, and we better put together a plan. But really, at that time, which was right around March 1st, we were thinking that plan was going to be how we're going to clean schools, um, ensure safety of kids. We were not even considering at that point a cancellation of school. And within 2 weeks, we were shut down. And we didn't know at the time, but for the rest of the year. I was pretty adamant at the beginning that we would not go into NTI. NTI is called non-traditional instruction. It was passed in Kentucky statute around 2014. And it was really for small rural districts who have a lot of school closure because of inclement weather, for them to not have to make up so many days in the summer. And so it was really meant to be a day or two at a time, not 8 weeks in a large urban district. And I
Mhm.
was very aware of the digital divide that we have in our community. We talk a lot, all the time, about achievement gaps. I like to now call opportunity gaps more than anything else. And I think this signifies an opportunity gap more than anything else, is a student's access to technology and to wireless high speed internet. And so I knew going into this that if we were like some other districts who just went out on Friday and said on Monday, students grab your computer, log on to your Google Classroom and start working with your teacher, we would not be successful at that. A lot of large districts did that and they have not been successful. So we knew we could not just say, all right, we're going to go from March 15th to August 15th without any type of school whatsoever or support for kids. So we intentionally took those 2 weeks plus spring break, built a platform, went into schools and got 20,000 Chromebooks, and began that long, tedious process of trying to get those out as quickly as we can, really while having everyone telecommute, and do the best job we can to, there's no way to eliminate that opportunity gap in this situation, but to reduce it or mitigate it as much as possible. So as many kids as possible are having quality experience through this NTI. And I'll say this, there is no way to replace a student sitting in a classroom with a teacher on a day-to-day basis. That's impossible to do. And so this will have an impact on learning for all students. But unless you mitigate that opportunity gap, you are going to end up having greatly increasing the achievement gap that we have with our students.
And so let's talk about do you think that our students are really learning during this time? I mean, are they well, first, let's just stop right there. Do you think they're learning during this time?
So, yes, I do. I think there is. Now, I do think, when we look at the engagement of students, and so I just want to be honest, when we report participation numbers, we report the Kentucky Department of Education's participation numbers, and we're showing rates around 94% of the kids and 86,000 in week 2 logged into their Google Classroom. Okay. So there is no doubt there's learning. I'm not going to sit up here and say, though, that it's equivalent to the learning that would happen in school. I do not believe that to be the case. And I think nationwide, this is going to be a very, it has the potential to be very damaging to students across America when it comes to achievement. And we're going to have to really be intentional about being better at supporting kids when we come back in their learning. But I said this last night too, what we found also is we found some students who actually are engaging more. So we're not engaging in the traditional classroom, that we're seeing engaging more because it's a different type of learning. And they might feel more comfortable doing it this way and finding a new way to learn. So yes, I think there's learning, but no, I don't think it's equal to what happens inside of a classroom.
Okay. And then I guess, and there are questions coming in, but I want to just finish this line of thought. So what percentage of the kids do you think are actually engaging on a daily basis with educators or with the Google Classroom, whether it's an online assignment or whatever?
So yeah, we're going to have to, when we get through this, run some data. It's very difficult for us to say the exact number, just because the way we track it according to the Kentucky Department of Education. If we're talking every single day, no, I don't think it's 94%. But I think that you would find that when we have 86,000 kids logging into their Google Classroom, it's probably not that high every day. But I feel confident that 3/4 or above of our students are on a daily basis logging in. Now, that's too many that aren't. I know that and understand that, and very much concerned about the children that aren't the ones doing that on a daily basis. But compared to other large cities, with some of the data that is coming out of other large cities, we are very pleased with what we're seeing as far as having zero ability to physically interact with a student. And this is nationwide. And so the contact that a teacher can have is through the telephone, through the computer, and the various types of technology. That is really our only type of interaction. So I am very pleased with what I've seen as a result of that.
Okay, that's good. And that is good to know. 75%, I think that's probably higher than a lot of us imagined. So when you talk about not being able to just send kids home, you know, I think we have to talk about socioeconomics, right? I mean, we cannot silo education and think that this is just in a vacuum. So talk about how that impacts your ability to do your job and reach these children.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm always tentative to just use poverty as to blame on not for a lack of achievement. So, I want to be clear about that we can't use that as an excuse. All students can learn, there's no doubt about it. But we also have to be very cognizant of what poverty does to a student's ability to be connected and engaged at a school at all times. And so just when we look at the number of students in Jefferson County Public Schools that are homeless, I mean, we're looking at greater than 6,000 students before the coronavirus crisis. More than 6,000 JCPS students were homeless. And, that housing insecurity, how much that can impact a student's ability to come into school every day, how it can impact their attendance. We don't see great differences in attendance in JCPS between white students and African American students. Where we see a great difference in attendance is between free and reduced lunch students and non-free and reduced lunch students. And so that we know that poverty impacts many aspects of it, from student attendance to food security, housing insecurity. And I think back to when I was a child, I was fortunate enough to have all of those. I had security in all of those areas, but if I didn't have those, or possibly mental health was affected or impacted, or my physical health was impacted by poverty, all of those have an impact on a student's success in school. And then we can bring it all around to this NTI thing, which is a child who is able to go home with a laptop or a Chromebook, log on to high-speed internet, and connect with their teachers and schools on a daily basis is clearly going to be an advantage for a student who doesn't have that opportunity every single day, whether it's NTI or not.
Right, absolutely. And I think what we have tried so hard to push in this community and to explain to people and to government is you cannot have a community where you have people that have been so impacted by racism and discrimination and redlining and all of these things that, they existed and in some cases still do. And so you have these communities that have really been cut off from opportunities. So when you think about those young people who don't have Wi-Fi, that don't have these high-speed internet connections, whose parents are probably in many cases still essential workers, they're still cleaning bedpans, they're still out working at the grocery stores. You've got to wonder and recognize, I guess, the impact that has on a child and their ability to learn, their ability to access. And that is one of the fundamental things that I've tried to talk about in community, is that if you release a redlining report, you have to have a response to it, because everything then connects back. So we're sending you children without the proper supports in place. And that's what I think we have to be willing to discuss more of and be willing to invest more of, to give JCPS the resources that they need, that you need, in order to help our children.
And I'll add to that, Sadiqa, that being a principal for 10 years and a JCPS employee for 24, now the past 3, obviously, I haven't been day-to-day school, but as a principal, I can tell you, one of the things that I did was stood at the front door to try to greet students as they came into the high school every morning. And some of the stories and experiences a student would walk in and you can see on their face when they are impacted by something that's happening at home or in their community, and to talk to those students and know what they are bringing to school. And then for me to expect them to go sit in chemistry class and learn the periodic table, is not a reality. And so not only meeting the instructional needs of the students, and we have to do that, but meeting all these services that kids need to be successful, from food, housing, mental health, and many other areas. These are the things that kids are impacted by with poverty. That speaks to that point so much.
And I think it's worth making the point, your point earlier, you made it tonight, and you made it last night. It's not just about poverty, because poor white kids still do better than poor Black kids. So there's more than just poverty going on.
Correct. So, that's a big part of, and we might talk more about this, but it's a big part of what our board and JCPS has said with racial equity, is that it's very easy just to say it's about poverty. And that is the easy way out, as opposed to saying there is also a race component to this, that students, African-American students in JCPS, like districts all across America, are not achieving at the same rates. And we have to look inward and say, what are we doing or not doing that is leading to these outcomes? And we have to change those. And I used the example last night of identifying, and I think that's right where we got cut off, but identifying gifted and talented students. For years, JCPS has used one test and one score, and a student has to get a certain score in order to reach that on a test that may very well be biased in the first place. But there's also, by statute, 4 or 5 other ways that we can identify gifted and talented students at an early age. And research is clear. There is no difference. When we talk about gifted and talented, it's not about homework completion. It's not about compliant work. It is about having a talent or being gifted in one of several ways, which could be music or art. It could be leadership. It could be academic. But taking all of those steps to ensure that, if we have 35% of our student population is African American, then at least 35% of gifted and talented should be African American. And that has not happened in JCPS. And the impact of that over decades has been enormous.
And so how do you change that, Marty? How do you change that?
So we've challenged our, really, Sadiqa, we've had to just upset the apple cart and say in something like that we expect a plan from every school of how they're going to identify gifted and talented at their school in all 5 areas, not just one, which has been the traditional way to do it. We have to take out all of those additional components to gifted and talented, like a teacher signing off on the student needs to be gifted, and so much of that then leads to, was the student compliant? Did they do their homework? Which is not about gifted and talented. And then setting goals for each school. And so we have seen a dramatic increase in gifted and talented, and that's across the board, but specifically with African American students. Now, the challenge for us, the second part of that, is we can identify them. Now, by law, we have to provide those services. So we've never provided gifted and talented services in leadership. We have to do that now. So we were in the midst of doing that and beginning to do that for the coming year, right when coronavirus hit. But that's a big part of the change. So when I say doing things differently, and it's not just, that's not about poverty.
Right.
That is about us looking inward and saying we are doing things wrong, and it is causing disproportionality in gifted and talented numbers by the way we respond. It has nothing to do with the student or the family. And so those are steps that have to continue to be taken in so many areas to make these long-term changes in our student outcomes.
And I think that it is worth saying to leadership and teachers and all these people who I know are very well intentioned, that some of this, a large part of this, has to do with bias and sometimes structural racism. I mean, there are systemic problems and systematic problems and things that we do have to address. And it gets really uncomfortable for people to have that called out because they feel like it's very personal. But this system is bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than any of these children. This is really about how we turn this Titanic. And I feel like it is a Titanic because of the achievement gap and because of how urgent the work is. And so your job is a tremendous job. And part of why we're here tonight is because we want people to line up and stand with you. And this is why we do it. Because of one thing you said, you're upsetting the apple cart. And that's what we need. Like I have been saying over and over, we cannot have a back to normal. If we come through COVID-19 and then we go back to normal, we have failed ourselves.
I agree.
Because normal hasn't been good enough for a whole lot of us for a long, long time. And so I want you to push as much as you can push. And so we have a question here. Let me try. What can we do to help students who were falling behind before they return to school? And then the second part of that, will the next year start going over what they missed in the classroom? Did you get
So
those?
let me say this. Here is what we are wrestling with right now. Our original intention as we went into this, and we still have this intention, was that we would get at least 5,000 kids into a summer learning program. Now, summer learning is much more challenging because kids want a summer experience. They don't want just the same classroom that they have August through May. And so you have to do some engaging things that kids have fun with, make it almost similar to a camp experience, while also supporting reading and math at the same time. So our goal is to have 5,000. I seriously doubt at this point whether we will be allowed at any point during the summer to bring students back physically into a school building and do any type of large number of students together. I don't see that as a reality. I mean, despite what we might hear out of DC at times, it's clear from our governor's message that it is going to be a while before kids come back together, which even makes me concerned about the return of school in August. What will that look like? And, and I'll just say this, Sadiqa, I think many of the steps that are in place, I'm concerned about how it could impact students, and specifically African-American students, from many steps that are taken that could impact student attendance. So I'm just really worried about how that's going to look. So we are planning that path. All right, let's say we cross our fingers and something great happens and it disappears and we can have kids in July. Then we're going to get thousands of kids and really push, because we do have some stimulus money to get kids in camps this summer to make up. If not, we are going to do virtual summer learning. We're going to get as many kids as we can a Chromebook, a hotspot. Now, the challenge is what's going to make a kid want to do that during the summer, because if it's NTI again, they're not going to do it. My daughter will not do it if it's NTI. And so how do we make sure that it's fun and engaging, but we're still working on reading and math? And then the second part of that question is, without a doubt, when we get back, we are going to, and we are working on making sure that we have the standards that kids miss from March until May, and really make sure that we work on those and provide students those interventions so that they recover those standards.
Okay, excellent. And let me ask you, with the stimulus money, is there any way you would consider smaller classrooms? So obviously we've been talking for at least a year now about recruiting additional teachers. So not even just teachers of color, which I think where the Urban League stands on that. We've got to increase those numbers. But just beyond that, just teachers, period. We see a need for smaller classrooms. Talk about that for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so really there's a lot of issues that go into smaller classrooms. So first of all, with the stimulus, a big challenge is it's a one-time fund. So, any recurring expense is a danger, because in 12 months, you either take away whatever you purchased, or you're going to have to find another fund to fund that initiative with. But there is no doubt a few things that we want to focus on, and I'll get to the smaller class size, to bring to our board, is number one, technology infrastructure. We want to break down that digital divide. And if, that every kid in this district has a device, every single one that they can use during school, take home if they need to use it. And especially if we had another coronavirus outbreak that caused it, they would walk out the door with a Chromebook in their hand and be ready to work the following Monday. The second part is extended learning time for kids. So we want additional whether that's summer, whether that's after school, whether that's weekend and community programs. We have to, if kids are going to catch up, it's a matter of time. If everyone is going to school the same amount of time and a child is behind, and they might not be at school as much, it's going to be very difficult to catch up. So we really got to extend the learning time. And then the third is really focusing on our AIS, which are traditionally learned as our lower performing schools, and using many of those funds to bring in more adults into those schools, reduce those class sizes in those schools, and provide more adult supports. One of the challenges with smaller class sizes is when you look at schools that are at capacity, it is very difficult because you have to have more rooms. When you reduce class sizes, you're having more rooms. Most of our AIS schools are not at capacity, so we are able then to reduce class sizes in those schools. So that will be a part of the plan.
Okay, so reducing class sizes in the AIS schools, is that what you said?
Yeah, we're going to have a real intention of focusing a lot of these dollars on AIS schools.
And what kind of time frame are we thinking about, Marty, here?
It all depends when the money reaches us, but we're hoping that we get this in 4 to 6 weeks.
And I know, just back to funding for a second, I do recognize that the stimulus money is one-time funding, but in your State of the District address, you mentioned previously, a tax. And I know nobody wants to hear about that right now with COVID-19 happening, but it won't always be this way. If you had that temporary funding for that first 12 months and then rolled into a nickel tax or whatever it is. Now there is one tax that can only be used for capital, right?
Yes, that's the nickel tax.
Okay, the nickel tax can only be used for capital. And so I had a conversation with someone, I don't remember who it was, about maybe using that for all capital. And so any money that is currently in JCPS's budget would be pulled out and used as a resource for things like teacher recruitment or smaller classrooms or whatever, but none of that would be for capital. And you'd use everything that you get from the nickel tax for capital. That was one of the suggestions.
Yeah, that's an option. And I'll tell you, Sadiqa, we are working with our board. We'll actually have a board, some work sessions with them in the coming weeks about that potential for increased tax. I know it's a challenging and difficult time. But our problem is we can only bring it forward on a general election year, and there's no general election in 2021. And so the next general election, would be 2022. And then you're looking at 3, 4, 5 years before that has any real impact. And so I know it's a difficult step to take. It's a difficult step for our board. But my message in our State of the District address was that money matters. And if we expect to do the things we're talking about, which could be smaller class size, extended school, new school buildings. Right now, I'm proud that in Shawnee, there's 80 workers every day in there renovating the school right now probably not right now as we speak, but tomorrow morning they will be there banging away to fix that school. But when we look at the state of schools in West Louisville right now, and I said this at the district, it embarrasses me often that we have to send kids into the facilities that we have to send them. And every year we wait, I know this, and I'm sure you do as you've gone down this building, your athletic complex, that the minute you approve something, you're looking at least 30 months before the first child walks in that facility. And so, it's a tough decision for our board. I know that, but if we're going to change outcomes there is no reason why we should be 9 cents behind Fayette County in our property tax and 7 cents behind Oldham County. So Oldham County schools taxes their citizens 7 cents higher than Jefferson County does on property real estate per $100 of assessment. You see the buildings their school kids go to. And I mean, we have to be honest about it. Do we think the students in Oldham County have the same specific needs as the students in Jefferson County? And although most citizens in Jefferson County believe Jefferson County Public Schools is taxing them at a much higher rate, that's just not true. And we have to be willing to step up and say our kids matter as much or more than kids in Fayette County and Oldham County, and be willing to invest in our children.
And let's just be clear about something. That's what Louisville hasn't been willing to do. As a community, as a whole, we haven't been willing to invest. And your State of the District address, when you talk about Shawnee High School and that third floor being condemned, I felt like it was an indictment. It is an indictment on Louisville. And I appreciate that these are tough times right now, but you have made a very good point. We cannot pass this tax for 4 more years. We've got to do it. We've got to try now to make this happen because our children can't wait. 4 years, you've lost a whole group of high schoolers. I mean, 9th to 12th, they're gone. So we cannot afford to wait to do this work. It's urgent. And listen, and this is the thing that I hope people understand. If someone had invested differently in these children's parents, COVID-19 might not be so concentrated in some parts of our community. Some parts of our community might not be more likely to die if they contract this virus. But this has to do with the societal structure in the way we have been treated and some of the jobs we've been relegated to. And in large part, that also has to do with education. And so we've got to be able to make those connections for folks. That's what I feel like it's all very siloed. I feel like people think, oh, when you say there are kids that aren't showing up, there are kids that don't have Wi-Fi, and I can just hear the people feeling like, oh, those parents, if only they would, if only they would. It's kind of like that. If only those young men would pull up their pants, the whole world would be better. No, actually, it won't, because there are all kinds of other issues happening that we have to deal with. And I think that is so important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, just to the Shawnee, because I think it's, a building does not mean that great instruction can't or hasn't happened inside of there, or that people aren't teaching great. And you can have a fantastic building and have poor instruction.
That's right.
I think it's so symbolic of what's happened in this community for so long that in 1981, the third floor at Shawnee was considered unsound. And the decision was made by the district that there's not enough kids there. The facility is enormous. So let's just close it down. And I will quote Diane Porter, who has said multiple times, show me another school in any part of the town. And I'll say this, show me another high school in anywhere in America where it's just shut down. And so when I taught there in 97, I was a first-year teacher, and I couldn't believe that you're telling me there's a condemned floor in this building. And then over the years, people say, well, no kids want to go to Shawnee. Well, why would they want to go to Shawnee? There's a condemned floor. So it is just symbolic to me of the steps that we need to take, or what hasn't been taken in one specific area of town, that we must invest in if we expect different outcomes. And just expecting teachers to do things differently in schools, yes, we have to do that. But that will get us incremental results. We need to do big things if we expect big results.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yesterday, and maybe even a little bit of this conversation, you spoke about some youth being more engaged with technology even than they were in person in the classroom. And so the questioner asked, does the district have the capabilities or the capacity to offer students more tailored approaches related to, hybrids of online learning and in person, now that we see for some kids, we're actually reaching them?
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think it is I think we've identified several positives that possibly could come out of a crisis. And I think any organization who's going to be successful looks at a crisis and says, okay, what's the opportunity to change? And I was talking today, anyone who thinks the world is going back to the way it was when we are through with this is fooling themselves. And so we all are going to have to adjust, and education is another one. If we think those districts that think, let's just go back to the way it was March 12th, we will not be successful. And so one of the things that I think we have an opportunity to do is find and know that some kids learn differently, and that sitting in a desk for 7 hours a day is not the answer to the way they learn. And so there is no doubt we've built this platform now. First of all, I think we have struggled for so many years, and I know as a high school principal, we paid teachers to stay, we got money and paid teachers to stay after school, and so that kids could stay after school to get additional help. But we know so many kids have to get home after school that, waiting a couple hours or the transportation home after a couple hours is more challenging. They may be watching siblings. They may have to work themselves in a high school setting. But if we did digital interventions so that a kid could log on when they get home, they could be home and they could interact with a teacher at 6 at night and have interventions. And then especially for our kids who have traditionally not been engaged, whether that's alternative schools, whether that's English language learners, whether kids are behind, this is a great opportunity to do a hybrid. I've said this for a while, Sadiqa. We have English language learners who come into our district who may be 17 or 18 years old, and they start in high school, and they might only have 5 or 6 credits. And we are setting them up for failure by putting them in a traditional high school setting, because there's no way they're going to get to the credits they need to graduate before they age out. So instead of doing that, let's provide them that hybrid model where some might be in person, but they can have a quicker path to graduation through an online model that is really based on competency. Once they show that they've met the standards, they get that credit. And so we've just got to look at things very differently than we ever have before once we come out the other side of this.
That's right. And I hope we're creative in a way that doesn't leave people behind, leave students behind, or create a situation where one group is just sort of pushed through, just to be pushed through, just to be done with, but really that they're able to function. They're ready to graduate. They're college and career ready.
No question.
Really committed to that. And I really do hope that the business community understands the commitment that they have to have to the goals that you're setting as well.
Yes, and I think that's, the business community being involved in our academies of Louisville has been a difference maker for us, getting kids in, programs around transition readiness. That has been a true difference maker for us. So, but that's got to continue. We've got to continue to build that and make sure that our kids, our high school kids, are that college and career ready.
Absolutely. And ideally, how many Chromebooks or computers would a well-resourced JCPS need every year to be democratic in how all children access self-paced learning to supplement in-classroom education? So how many, I think I heard you last night say 1-to-1, but maybe you have a different answer, or maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at, we are right around that 98,000 plus. One of the things we are, so we have, 5,000 early childhood students, we have 6,000 kindergarten students. So, I mean, and it's about 6,000 per grade. And so we're working with, what is the impact? Do those students use Chromebooks or is it a different type of digital environment that they use? But without a doubt, our goal is to get to 1-to-1, 98,000. Now, just so we know, there's 2 types of 1-to-1. Mm-hmm. I can have in a high school that has 1,000 students in it, I can have 1,000 Chromebooks in that school. That's 1-to-1, but they sit in the teacher's classroom in a cart, mm-hmm. and they're only pulled out when the teacher wants to use them. And so that's truly not 1-to-1. 1-to-1 to me means that, yes, that computer might have a home at Doss High School, for instance, but when a kid needs to take a Chromebook home, they take the Chromebook home. And we have to be okay with, well, that Chromebook might come back damaged. Mm-hmm. It might break, it might not work, it might not come back. That is what we faced when it came to our NTI sending Chromebooks. We have to be okay yeah, we might not get all 25,000 back, but it's too important not to do that. And so we not only have to have that 98,000 plus Chromebooks, we have to have the replacement. Okay, when one it breaks or doesn't come back, we can't say to a student, "I'm sorry, you don't get another one because of that." We have to be willing to step up and say, "We'll replace that." So there's a replacement part of it too.
And I want to say this to you too about deploying the Chromebooks that you had. I think it was tremendous that you didn't have that attitude of some of them may not come back, some of them may be broken, and so therefore we're not going to risk this. I think the risk will the reward will far outweigh the risk, and I think it's just so important that you made that decision. You're welcome. When you talk about one-to-one, what kind of timeline are you looking at? Because from my perspective, Marty, the things you talk about are urgent. We don't have a lot of time to play and to wait. The stuff you say, I want to see it done yesterday. So what's your timeline on one-to-one?
Our goal will be to have that by the fall. And so, the one challenge we all run into is with the stimulus money, there's a lot of districts ordering the same thing. So I'll give an example, hotspots. Everyone is clamoring for hotspots right now to get these to their families. And the inventory is a challenge. But, if we get, which I'm very confident we will get the stimulus money that we think we are going to get, that's going to get us to where we want to be so that we can be at one-to-one in the fall.
Okay. All right. Very good. That is wonderful. I like that timeline. I mean, I like yesterday, but I'll take the fall. Let's see here. We got a lot of questions. What proactive strategies are you all contemplating to assist in closing a projected widened achievement gap?
Yeah, and that gets back to kind of what I was talking about before. And I'll say this, we're a part of a group in JCPS called the Council of the Great City Schools. It's 76 of the largest school districts in America, based on enrollment, which JCPS is in the upper half of that. And on a Zoom call every Thursday, so tomorrow I'll be with them again. And we have had significant discussions about the impact of this, that first of all, there's already an achievement gap, and this will widen the achievement gap. I think everybody is saying that that is the danger in this. And so thinking about those plans to do that, which is first of all, being very intentional about summer supports and doing everything we possibly can to get kids in. And if we can't, being very creative about how we get kids to interact and engage throughout the summer. And that can include, so we can include incentives for students and incentives for families to have their kids doing that. So, we're just kicking around ideas like if a student spends, 10 hours a week engaged in learning, can we get the family a Kroger card? Or something of that we'll do anything we possibly can to get kids engaged and working hard throughout the summer. But the real meat of that, Sadiqa, is going to come when we return to school. We assess the kids immediately on what we call our MAP testing, which is where they are in math and reading. And then we respond immediately to our students, which can include regrouping, putting kids with certain groups, providing in-school interventions, after-school interventions, but being very intentional about what that MAP test tells us in reading and math and responding immediately. And what I've told our principals is, we no longer will be able to move slowly in what we call our instructional systems, which are supportive kids. We're going to have to move as quick as we ever have and be as assertive as we ever have of responding to the results of that assessment when they walk back in the door.
And you certainly would agree with us that the achievement gap is going to impact and is already impacting schools that are outside of those AIS schools, right? We're talking about the entire system when we think about the achievement gap.
There is an achievement gap across the entire system. in nearly every school. I don't want to speak for every school, but nearly every school we have an achievement gap.
And so how can the community support?
That's
And
a
that's
great question.
parents too.
That's a great question. And you know me, I've talked a lot of simply about just the impact of attendance, and how attendance negatively impacts achievement in JCPS and as a community. And I think that's a community issue in many ways. Yes, it's a school district issue, but it is a community issue. And to your point earlier, it is not just a parent's fault. No parent intentionally says, I don't want my child in school. There are many factors that go into student attendance. Some are on us, like we can get into the start time of school, but others are on social factors, social determinants, medical factors, housing insecurity, food insecurity, transportation, all of these that can be community-wide issues. But I think the more the community can get behind us, right now we have about 30,000 students who miss 18 or more school days a year. So how would we possibly expect students to catch up or be successful when they're missing 18 more days than their peers? And we have about 55,000 who miss 6 or more days, which is that day, which we find is when achievement starts being impacted. And so, I think a simple focus is support and attendance. We've talked about that a lot. Getting kids to school more often. We have to take steps as a district to do that and make sure that kids are successful getting to school. I can't say that enough. Now, I don't believe that's the only work of the achievement gap. So, we could have an entire program on the achievement gap alone. But a lot of that is internal and the things we need to do differently that may take, just really making sure that we do it year after year. Like I said, gifted and talented, looking at the way we discipline students, looking at the way we provide interventions, looking at the way we assign kids to classes, looking at the way where teachers teach and experienced teachers teach, looking at minority teachers and how many we have. There's an impact on achievement there. So much of that is what we have to do, but there is a community-wide aspect to that as well.
All right. I appreciate that. And you just brought something up that I wanted to make sure I went back to. And I'm going to get through everybody's questions, please. We're not going to take all night to do it. I will get through it. But I want to talk about minority teacher recruitment, what your plans are there, and when we will see those things being implemented.
Okay, so one of the most...
And why that's important.
Yeah, so the research is very clear. When a student has at least one teacher that looks like them, that reflects them in race, that their achievement is impacted positively. And for each teacher they have that increase is compounded. And right now we don't. We have about 12.5% of our teachers are African American and about 36% of our kids. So it's nowhere even close to where we want to be. Administrator wise, we are right at that. Principal, we're right at that 35, 36%. We're very close in assistant principal and counselor. But when it comes to teacher, we're not even close. One of the most impactful programs that I think we will be implementing in this district is the teacher residency program. And so Dr. Marshall and his team at DEP and JCPS have developed the teacher residency program. And so a big problem we have found are so many of our former JCPS students. I have multiple ones who come back from college, they have a bachelor's degree, they want to teach, but they don't have a teacher certification. They went to school for something else. And so they want to teach, but they can't go back to school. They have a family to support and they can't just stop and go back and get certified. And so they may be working as an instructional assistant in JCPS, but we can get them as a teacher. And so in the teacher residency program, we are hiring and we're specifically focusing on African-American teachers. We're partnering with the University of Louisville. We pay that teacher candidate, that resident, the $30,000 a year so that they can have a job. They work in a master teacher's classroom. in a high need school. That so there's multiple teachers in that classroom. They work Monday through Thursday, and they go to school all day on Friday instead of coming to work. And in 1 year, they get their master's degree and a certification. And so we had 150 apply for our first year. We were only going to, our goal was to get 30 African-American teachers. We had 150 apply. Now, not all of those, we had some other races in that, but I think we are going to get to the point where we can have 100 teacher residents a year, with over 50% of those being minority. And then we can begin to really change those numbers in JCPS. And I want to thank our board is really funding that at about $1.2 million a year. But it is going to be a game changer when it comes to bringing in African-American teachers into the district.
And since you brought the board up, did they all vote for that?
Yes, they all voted for that.
Okay, well then thank you to JCPS board. Thank you so much for that vote. Okay. Marty, what about retention? I think we talk a lot in community about those brand new teachers going into some of the hardest schools, the toughest schools, the schools that are really under-resourced in many ways. And as soon as they can get out of there, they're gone. They're going to schools that may not, I mean, you know, they're just going to some of the easier schools. Not that any school is easy, because listen, there are lots of us who never, ever, ever want to spend the whole day with other people's kids. So we thank you all so much for your sacrifice. But I do worry about our ability to keep more seasoned teachers in the schools that need them. Talk about how we're going to do that and when we're going to start doing it, or if we've already started.
Yeah, so retention is an important part. Retention is an important part nationwide in teaching. And it is one of, without a doubt, one of the toughest professions there is. And right now, our retention rate in years 1 through 5, staying in JCPS, is about 70%, which is higher than most urban school districts, but still it says within 5 years, we're losing 30% of our teachers. So that's issue number one, that we have to retain our teachers. But I think more to your point is issue number 2 is we have to make sure that our experienced teachers that have a passion. Now, I want to say this, where it's been unsuccessful in other cities is when you force teachers into certain schools. If you don't have a passion for school turnaround and for doing the work, you will not be successful at it. And so, you know, and there is debate about paying teachers and principals additional money to work in high need schools. I am a believer that we should. I'm a believer that it is a greater challenge in many ways, because anytime you're working with children in poverty, you have many other issues that you're dealing with. You're providing a lot more social support for kids. And you have to have a certain attitude that, you know what, when I was at Doss, I wanted to bring people around me that said, no matter what a kid did yesterday, no matter what happened in school, you're coming into school today and welcome. Can't wait to have you back. Let's have a better day today, and let's make sure you're successful. And so it is more challenging. And I think that, and on top of that, there is more accountability, without a doubt. Being a principal in a CSI school means that you could be told that you don't have leadership capacity to remain, which I completely disagree with, which thankfully is now removed because of House Bill 158 or Senate Bill 158, excuse me. I believe that deserves a higher pay. Now, there is debate as to how much that keeps teachers in a building, but I do think it's an important part of acknowledging the work and attracting teachers and increasing the amount of teachers that interview for a job. As the principal of Doss, there were many times when I had an opening at the school and I had one candidate to interview. That's not a good feeling. And so if it expands a principal's opportunity to hire 7 or 8 people, then I'm all for paying more for those that work in high need schools.
And so you see that as incentivizing those teachers to come and work in and stay in high need schools, right?
That's correct. And we do that at this point. Is the dollar figure is probably, it is not high enough.
It's not high enough.
Not high enough, because in the end, they get about $4,000 more a year to work in a high need schools. But I don't think that's enough
No.
to say I'm willing to go somewhere else and do a tougher job.
And then I think, don't they have to give something up to get the $4,000? I thought there was some other little catch. I was disappointed in that policy, I have to tell you. And I don't know who messed it up, if it was your team or the union or whoever, but I know I don't like it. And it's not really helping. It is not what we intended. It is not what we were focused on. We really want to make sure that those more seasoned teachers are willing to commit and stay in those schools where they're needed. And because that continuity is helpful too. Teams working together, learning each other, learning the students, growing together. I think that's so important. So if we can help, I know it wasn't you. I don't know how it all got messed up, but if you need any support from community on that, please know that we are here for you, because we believe in that.
Well, thank you. And I don't necessarily, we can disagree. I don't think it was necessarily messed up. I don't think the dollar figure was high enough. And so what we asked were those teachers, where some of that money came, was 5 additional work days at the beginning of the year for training, because we believe that teachers in CSI schools, we want to provide additional training. So they get 5 additional days paid. But I think where we have to really look at is how we come up with the dollars to pay those teachers much more than that's
right.
$100.
And that's what we need to, like, let's just be honest and transparent about it, right? The 5 more days of work, and then we're going to somehow justify the money. The money is justified by you staying in the role. And as you become more seasoned, staying there and staying with those students who need you in those schools. I think that's really important. And I hope that Brent McKim, leader of the union, is watching tonight, or will go back and watch, because this is something that really does matter and will help us to close the achievement gap. We've got to be willing to do some things in a different way. So I'm not blaming I'm blaming somebody. I can blame everybody. I just know it wasn't enough money. It didn't work. You can take the blame. I don't care. I just want it to be fixed for our students next year, because I think it's important. I think it's another strong tool for you to have in your toolbox. And you have already proven that you want Louisville to be different than the rest of the country. So some of these things that they're telling you about what happened here and there, I think it's important to use those things and learn lessons from other places. But I hope that we give you permission here in Louisville to do some things outside the box.
Yeah.
That's what I hope we do.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Thank you. Let me get through these questions here. What proactive strategies? I've asked about that, I think. I'll save that one. Let's see. Great stuff happening in lots of spots. This is a great question. How does the district begin to institutionalize best practices for Black and Brown children district-wide?
Yeah, that's what a great question that is. And so, I will tell you, a problem in JCPS for many years has been pockets of excellence. Mm-hmm. And, that what we see is you could go into any school and see teachers doing incredible work in every school and principals doing incredible work, but having systems in place that, first of all, ensuring that, first of all, here's what we value. We value these things and we expect them to happen in every single school. That when it comes to achievement, especially with racial equity, that we have tools in place to measure whether schools are making progress on the things that we hold valuable. And Dr. Marshall and his team are involved in that on a regular basis, that we identify what those are. We have schools set goals and we move to them, and they intersect with our instructional systems. And so for the first time ever last year, we said, here are the systems in every school we expect to happen that intersect with equity and reducing that achievement gap. That has been incredibly hard work to get people to do things differently. Mm-hmm. Now, on top of that, here is the hardest part, is changing hearts and minds as well. And so when we get into implicit bias. And implicit bias is exactly what that is. It's not intentional. It's not something that someone is intentionally saying I'm doing. And I use this example a lot, Sadiqa, but I want to repeat it because I think it's so important. When I was principal early on at Jeffersontown High School, I came in and I was told the school needs more discipline. And so I came in as the new sheriff in town. And I spent the first few years really being the hard, making sure kids did what they were supposed to do. And I was pretty successful at making kids compliant. They would sit in their seat, but they weren't learning. They were just sitting in their seat and they weren't engaged. And it took me until I could self-reflect and look in the mirror. And I would honestly say that sometimes my interactions with students in the hallway that looked a certain way might be a little more harsh than a student who looked a different way. And specifically, I don't want to dance around it, an African-American student, my voice tone might be different if I saw a student in the hallway, because I think they might be not where they're supposed to be. And then maybe that would escalate. The student would say something back to me in response, as they probably should have done. And then I would escalate it. And before long, the student might be suspended. And I had to look inward and say, what am I doing to lead to these outcomes? But getting people to do that is, as you know, extremely challenging, and look inward and say, what am I doing that's leading to some of these disproportionate outcomes for students and achievement gaps? And so continuing to push on the heart and the mind as well, and not just say, okay, it's only about these systems and it's only about identifying gifted and talented. All of those things are important, but making sure that we focus on things like implicit bias is critical as well.
Well, I appreciate your honesty and your ability to reflect, because if there is anything wrong with the world, it is that people do not reflect enough and then make changes based upon those reflections. So that's a good thing. I'll tell you two other things that will help you as you move this work forward when you think about implicit bias, and so that people don't feel so put upon. Dr. Tuckson was on with us a couple of nights ago, and he talked about these blind medical testing that had happened. And so basically, if you presented a patient, you had two patients, one black, one white, oftentimes the diagnoses would not be accurate for the black patient. They would not be told to do X, Y, Z, those things that the white patient was told to do. If you took the same fact pattern and did not tell the doctor the race of the patient, the doctor would get the diagnosis right more often.
Wow.
So that's not just in education where you see that bias, right? It is across systems. It is across everything. And that's what we have to explain to people constantly. And one thing I do appreciate about you is your ability to go back and cite the data and talk about why this is important. But the other thing is to make it clear to folks that we're not just talking about education. You are trying to educate young people that every system they touch is pushing them down and oppressing them. And all those biases that people have, they then bring into the school. And that's not to say that anybody is intentionally doing it. Some certainly are, but most aren't. But you have to acknowledge that they're there. And then one other one in the law profession. We recently, I guess in about 3 years ago, we had someone come in and do some implicit bias training. And they had a law student named Tyrone James. And Tyrone James sent his resume to all the biggest law firms because he was top of his class. And he put on the resume that he was president of the Black Students Association. And he said Tyrone James. And no one called him. Then he sent the resume out, same name. But no, this is wrong. He took the name off. Okay. Left the Black Student Association, the Black Law Student Association. They were fine with that. He got calls, he got a job. But instead of calling himself Tyrone, he said TJ. And they called. So across sectors, we see that bias. And that's what I think education and educators have not been willing to embrace. This idea that America at her core is broken. And so any system that was created for people, you know, and we were told you can't read, we don't want you to read. Any system that comes from people who would do that to an entire group of people is going to be flawed. And so now we have an obligation to make some real changes. And so, I mean, that's what this is. That's what we are desperate for. And that's why, you know, the time is so much of the essence. So we talked about the residency program. I'm going to get through this stuff because we're going to end at 9:30, okay? So just in case you're looking at your watch and your wife is saying, where is he? He's just in the kitchen and he's still there. We talked about increasing recruitment efforts for with the teacher residency program. More Black men, especially in early childhood. That's what we're hearing everywhere, and someone has sent that in. It's not even a question. It's in all caps. We need more Black men, especially in early childhood. You agree?
Couldn't agree more. You know, and I think that's what the focus of the teacher residency is, not just Black men, but we're seeing many that are applying that just would not have been able to go back. They have a bachelor's degree. I mean, I had 3 or 4 of my former students who wanted to be teachers, and they had a bachelor's degree, but they just didn't have the ability because of family obligations to quit their job and go back to school. And so this is where we'll see this. It can't be the only thing, but I think we're going to see some really positive numbers out of that residency program.
All right, very good. And someone asked, are you taking advantage of the time and training, this time right now, and training teachers or planning some trainings for the summer for teachers?
Yeah, that's, you know, one of the major challenges here is the lack of gathering people together. I mean, I can't say enough about how hard that has been just for something like sending out Chromebooks because of, you know, people are afraid right now there, and they have a right to be afraid to be out working. So, you know, I think the future, Sadiqa, and this is going to lead us to this, is we are going to have to think about things like professional development. Does not mean we have to bring everybody into a big room to do something, that we can do it this way. People can have professional development from their homes. So we are right now, in all honesty, the professional development is not, are asking teachers until May 27th, focus on NTI. We want your plate cleared other than supporting kids right now, calling kids, helping kids. But we are quickly planning what that's going to be in the summertime for professional development that most likely will be like this and not in person.
Yeah, which could be good, If we're asking the kids to do it, I mean, we'll figure out, you know, all the complications of it by learning on ourselves. So I think that's important. And I also think teacher professional development can't wait, right? It has to be happening. What do you suspect that the impact will be on the with the standardized testing? So we've missed all of this standardized testing. So how will it affect classroom instruction, do you think? And particularly, like, without a base assessment, what might curriculum look like?
Well, I think, you know, and I'm going to say this, I think we have an opportunity also in this to take a look at the curriculum we are teaching kids. I don't think there's anything that pushes kids away from school more than the curriculum, especially at the high school level. When we look at some of the things kids are learning and we try to convince them that they're going to need it, and we all know they're probably not going to need that. We could talk to each other about all the things we learned in high school or what kids are learning that we don't know right now. I walk into my daughter's room and have no idea some of the things and I somehow made it through life. So, I mean, I think we need to think about that. And I read an article today in Phi Delta Kappan about, it's an educational journal, research journal, about a superintendent in Long Island who made the decision that elementary school kids were being crushed with standardized tests and was taking the joy out of school for elementary school kids. And so he decided that every elementary school kid was going to get 45 minutes of unstructured recess every single day, and that kids were not going to have homework, because the research is clear in elementary school. homework doesn't necessarily have anything to do with achievement. And so what they found was with 45 minutes of recess every single day and additional things they did in the school to increase joy for students, disciplinary infractions went down 50%. People thought it was going to kill student test scores. In 3 years, they actually rose significantly.
Hmm.
So what we always think of what standardized test scores means, we got to put a kid in a desk and yeah, we've got to do some of those things and provide interventions. But I also think we have a time period here now where we can think outside of the box and say, what are kids missing that we can provide to them? I'm not necessarily saying just more recess, but I am saying ways to engage kids, because I believe this: when students feel a sense of belonging at school, they're more successful. When they do not feel any sense of belonging at that school, our chances of providing them any real support dwindles dramatically.
Absolutely, absolutely. I hope that when you all gather, when the teachers gather, that you spend some time saying those kinds of things and really inspiring them to see things differently, maybe back to the way it used to be. You sort of, light fires, I think. And hopefully they get that. And I know there are a lot of good teachers who are very, very passionate about what they do. I credit teachers with so much of my success in life. But what happens with the teachers that are burned out? They don't really want to be there. They're not connecting anymore. How do we, let me find a nice way to say this. How do we get rid of them, I guess? I mean, they're just, yeah, what do we do?
Well, this is what I believe with any employee in any organization. I believe there can be two deficiencies with an employee, and those can be a lack of will and a lack of skill. And I think for all, whether that's superintendents, principals, administrators, teachers, whatever job, and outside of education, I think those are two major reasons that people struggle in their job. And I always say, I can help with lack of skill. I really can. Now, there's a certain point where we have to say this profession might not be for you, that, everyone can't be a doctor, everyone can't be a lawyer, everyone, and I couldn't be either one of those, but everyone also can't be a teacher because it
Mhm.
requires a skill. But we can work to improve skill. What we cannot do is improve a lack of will. And I say that all the time when people feel that people are struggling. If it's a lack of skill, I always say, are you providing the necessary supports, professional development, mentoring, modeling, all of these things to help a person get better? And if they have that will to do it and you're providing that platform, then I feel very positive about their opportunity to improve. If it is a lack of will, then that is somebody that we just have to say, we have to find a way that they are not a part of the profession, because our jobs are too important to have someone who just has a lack of will. And so you're right, that has to happen. And the intensity with which our school leaders go about ensuring that is extremely important. Traditionally, too often in JCPS, what it has been is, let me find a way to get them just out of this school. And so they transfer away from the school, but then they're in another child's classroom teaching.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's what we can't do. And we've really been dedicated to doing those things the right way through the evaluation process. And the vast majority of our teachers have that will and they have, that skill. But we do. It's too important. And you can ask a kid anytime whether their teacher, the one thing they'll tell you, and kids don't lie, is which teachers they have are passionate about what they do and truly
Mhm.
care about what they do. And the kid will say that and respond to that. So really focusing, I think, and it gets to what you said, burnout, but I think it's that lack of will that we have to focus on and make sure that we are very intentional and do not let up on that in order to make sure we do go through the process to ensure that they're no longer in our classrooms.
That is very good. And what about mental health? I know that you made it possible for us to bring a lot of, it might have been more than 100, I can't remember the number, mental health therapists, specialists into the schools. And so what happens with them during COVID-19? Are they in touch with the students at all? And so first answer that question.
Yeah, so first of all, when we brought them on, the last thing I wanted was for them to be a pseudo disciplinarian, meaning a kid misbehaves in a classroom. Okay, you go see the mental health professional. So misbehavior is not necessarily mental health issue. It can be, but it's not always that, and very rarely that. I mean, there's many reasons for misbehavior. And so that's what we didn't want. And we wanted really our mental health professionals to be able to interact as almost like a caseload of students that they support in the school. And so, you know, the expectation is those mental health professionals are continuing their work with students, hopefully virtually if possible, but if not by phone. But we want to continue to support those students. And I'll go into this a little bit. One of the, I don't know if I say depressing parts of this for me has been that we've added 100+ mental health professionals, but I feel like it's only the tip of the iceberg we're reaching.
Yeah.
Right now, data research in this country shows that 1 out of 4 kids ages 10 through 18 suffer from some type of mental health need that is not being met. And so if we play those numbers out right now, you know, really middle and high school, we're looking at 50,000 students. So we're looking at, you know, 12 to 13,000 students in our school district who have unmet mental health needs. And so, you know, obviously 100 mental health professionals is not going to serve 12,000 kids effectively. So, you know, this is going to be a community-wide systemic issue that we have to address, because suicide right now is up 70% of that age group that I just said since 2008. And that's very scary as we think about that.
That is very scary. And this is another opportunity for us to use telehealth, to make sure that we have
Right.
things in place for telehealth, and to make sure that we have whatever approvals are needed in order to do that. So I know we're heavily focused on NTI, but we have to be almost as focused on making sure these mental health professionals can have contact with the students, because we don't know what these students have gone home to in some cases. And so we've got to make sure there is someone they trust that can help them. And I'm very sorry that we live in a society that puts so much on the school and that you have to worry about all of that, but it is the reality of where we are. And so I want to make sure that those consent forms are in place electronically, so that students can engage those mental health professionals that you do have through telehealth while they're away from the buildings.
Correct.
And are those in place or being worked on? It's one of the questions.
Those are in place. Now, we have so many different, this is not my expertise, so I don't want to get into it. We have a variety of mental health professionals that are certified in different ways that allow for different types of experiences and permissions that have to be done. So I know there is, I can't speak to them all, but I know there is a variety of different requirements for whatever certification each professional has.
No, I respect that answer completely. And so I will just leave you with this. I want to say we are hopeful that the mental health piece of it is also being integrated in the buildings, but then also during this NTI. I think it is very, very important to have that happen. And then also, if there is any special certification that those mental health professionals have to receive in order to be able to do telehealth, we hope that the district will support that. Obviously, this is coming from a place of knowledge. We've had some concerns with the suicide rate being what it is, with abuse being what it is, thinking about domestic violence and all of the pressures of people who might be losing jobs and what happens in those households. So we want to make sure that there is some real intentionality around those mental health professionals. And I will share this, and I've shared it publicly, maybe not ever on some recording for YouTube, but I mean, I used a mental health professional in elementary school. I had a lot of trouble with the transition from New York to Kentucky and all of the things that were happening with my family. I was in second grade. I missed 29 days of school. My whole educational career has been full of people who said I could never, and a few who said you can do whatever you want. You know, part of why I missed school was because I was smart and I didn't have to be there every day. I just didn't. And it wasn't until sixth grade that somebody asked me to come every day. Like, you really need to be here. And I'm going to take you to Chi Chi's, she said, if you don't miss any school days. And it was really that motivation. I had perfect attendance that year. It was the first year, but it was the first year that I'd ever even tried. Nobody had said they needed me to be there every day. And so there are things that we take for granted sometimes. And then running track, when I realized, you know, in seventh grade, if I'm not there, if I don't participate, I can't run. So I have to be here every day. So there are things that you use as carrots. And I think you made that point earlier. So, and then lastly, I'll just say this about, you know, it doesn't pay to be the person who is shutting a student down, because I can say for me, I remember all of those people very well who did not have any faith in me, did not encourage me, and absolutely expected me to be the worst statistic. And so I think it's very important for teachers to really be fully engaged, and all of us adults to be encouraging. Marty, what about redistricting? I know we're at 9:32, but this question has come up several times. What is going to happen with redistricting?
As far as student assignment?
I guess that's what they're talking about. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's one of the big changes that, you know, I'm very passionate about, and I've spoke about it a great deal. I can't say enough about the concern I have about how our student assignment plan has negatively impacted students, specifically in West Louisville. And I just, you know, I'll give an example, Sadiqa, that since we've had a consultant come work on our plan, it has opened my eyes to even more problems than I knew. And so we have found students whose parents have put them in a West End elementary school because it's in their cluster. So I'll give an example. A student who went to King Elementary School. Then their reside school for middle school was Kammerer Middle School out by Ballard High School. And their high school that they had to go to was Valley High School. So this was a student who lived in West Louisville who went out to Kammerer Middle School and didn't even have the opportunity to stay at Ballard High School. If they had made friends and wanted to stay, they were forced to go to Valley High School on the complete other end of town. And we actually have students whose parents who have students in Stewart Middle School in South Louisville and Ballard High School that live in West Louisville. And we would have to ask ourselves, unless that's the parent's choice, how would we expect a parent to be involved? Because to travel from West Louisville to Stewart Middle School to Ballard High School, if they have a student in middle and high, is over 40 miles all the way around. So that's just one example of the problem. I believe that all students and families should have choice. And right now, the only students that don't have choice to go close to home are students in West Louisville. And when we look at how desegregation occurred, it was a 50-50. 50% of the students were white students that were bused and 50% were Black students. Right now, it's 96% Black and 4% white. And so the burden of this has been on our students in West Louisville. And I think students in West Louisville should have the opportunity to stay close to home or go to another school of their choice. That is what choice is. But here is the problem we have. We don't have the schools in West Louisville right now in order for students to do that. So for us to do that, and our board chair, Ms. Porter, has been very vocal, if we want to give choice, then it has to be a great choice, meaning a great building, a brand new facility, great programs, top-notch teachers and administrators in the school, and then students will choose to do that. And so that is going to be on us, that the two choices can't be schools that are perceived as not successful, falling apart, or the way it was before desegregation, which were the schools in West Louisville had hand-me-down books from white schools on the other side of town, broken desks, things like that. And so we just have to be committed to doing this the right way. We will be having, we hope to be able to come back in person before we make that decision, so we can have plenty of time to really make sure that we have community forums. And then the second big part of our plan is increasing our magnets. So we want, anytime I think a student raises their hand and say, I want to go to school for a certain reason, they will likely be more successful. If we did a heat map right now of West Louisville, meaning the students in West Louisville who do that, choose to go to a magnet, it compared to other areas of town, there are the least even red, orange, or yellow spots in West Louisville. And so we have to, in our magnet programs, ensure that all of our students are getting access to great magnet programs, and just not some of our students. And so these are big changes we have to make that I think directly impact the achievement gap on a regular basis, and I think impact student attendance for students in West Louisville.
Well, student attendance impacts the achievement gap.
That's correct. And so
yeah,
if a kid had to get on a bus and go to Crosby Middle School from West Louisville, which is about 20 miles, if that student misses the bus in the morning, so my daughter, if she misses the bus, I'll put her in the car and take her to school. But that might not have the ability to go 20 miles away. And then we look at a student getting on the TARC bus. I mean, we are talking about a great distance away. And so, I think these are things that impact attendance all over the county. And I am all for a student choosing to leave their community. But once again, I want to highlight the word choose. I think that is so important.
I think that is important. And on the missing of the school bus and then not being able to get to school, I think we've talked about this before. It was just right before COVID-19, though. I would love to see us have some community caravan or some other transportation set aside for kids who have missed the school bus and need to come into school a little bit late or whatever, so that their parents don't have the burden if they've already gone to work. I know, for a large part of my life, my mother was an hourly employee. She wasn't able to just come back home and take me in. So once I was late, I was late. And so I think it's important for us to think about alternatives to getting our young people to school, because that can be done. And then the other thing I'd like to say on this idea of, this Crosby, the ride all the way to Crosby, I think what you're saying that is different than what a lot of people say, because let me just tell you how the Black community hears choice sometimes is really, or neighborhood schools, we perceive that as you stay in your neighborhood, we'll stay in our neighborhood. And we know that Louisville is one of the most segregated cities in the country. So it concerns me. But when you say, listen, but we expect to invest resources in your community, we expect for you to have good schools too. And so you have an example already, right? Brandeis is an amazing school in the West End. And all those white folks who don't want to cross 9th Street, and all those doctors who wouldn't normally cross 9th Street, they'll cross 9th Street for Brandeis. They've crossed it so much that our kids can't get in. The community can't even get in. So how do we create another Brandeis, another 2, 3, 4 Brandeises in the West End, but allow West End residents to have access to that top-notch town?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's a part of that magnet criteria of entrance into it. And so what we have to do, part of the plan is to make what we call mirror magnets. So mirroring Brandeis, but adding, I said in my State of the District, I have a belief that in West Louisville, we can have a music school that every kindergarten kid walks in at the same level. Every kid gets an instrument. They get 250 hours of music instruction a year. And by the time they're a 5th grader, I will guarantee you this, I believe this, every kid from no matter where they come from, whether
Mhm.
it's poverty, free or reduced lunch, or not, will be a musician by the time they leave that school. But what we have to do is ensure that when the lottery is done to enter that school, that there is an equal representation from each community in order to get in. And so that we have a very diverse school population that, yes, a family from East Louisville may get that lottery and get into that music school, but
Mhm.
sitting right next to him needs to be a student from West Louisville who has a passion for music as well. And we can do the same at that mirror magnet for Brandeis. And we're looking at other levels too. But all of those, when a family and a student says, I want to go to school because I love music and I want to learn to be a musician, the research is clear about their success. They will be more successful because of that sense of belonging.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
just have to get more kids all over doing that. But I'm a real believer that success for us in this will mean that not just students going to a local school so that you stay here, and it is so that we have more students choosing a school for a specific purpose, and specifically students in West Louisville who have been neglected in this process for many years.
Well, Dr. Polio, let me tell you something. You have the support of this community. You are, we trust you, and you are, I mean, we're putting a lot of faith in you. I can't find another way to say it. We need you to be successful. And so to the extent that you need our support to help remove barriers, we are certainly not going to agree on everything, but we
Right.
do agree on a lot of things. And I certainly do appreciate you. I appreciate your openness, your transparency. And really, I know that you have a heart to see things be different. And I hope that you will be able to push us because it is urgent and not, and I mean push your board. I mean push your teachers. Again, I think teachers are wonderful. There were teachers who saved my life. I also think we have systems that are broken and those systems need to be fixed. And we're for you because you are willing to upset the apple cart. And so I just want to thank you for taking time away from your family tonight. I know that you are working way more than 8 hours a day, just like always, because
Yep.
we've got the same job we had before COVID-19, and then add the COVID-19 stuff onto it, and then whatever else people think we should be doing. And so really, I sincerely thank you, and I hope that you feel supported by the league and the community that we represent. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sadiqa. And I just want to say, you and your staff are so supportive, not just of me and JCPS, but really the kids in JCPS, the programs that you all run, just going into this COVID-19 and the kids that you work with, your staff works with, and ensuring that each one of them got a Chromebook and were ready for this NTI. Not just that, but all the programs you all run to support our kids and their families. You've been a great partner, and a critical partner is important, and we appreciate that. But you have been a great partner with us with JCPS, and I know we have the same goal in mind, which is our children to be successful. So I appreciate all that you do as well.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. And can we please do this again sometime soon?
Happy to do it anytime.
All right. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks to
Bye-bye.
everybody who participated with us tonight. Thank you for your questions. Have a great evening.
Thank
And
you.
please stay safe and healthy. Come to the Urban League and get your COVID-19 testing tomorrow.